you get the kind of things going on in Indiana, and I'm going to give you guys a fire hose of terrible stories. So first, an Indianapolis man believes ICE wrongfully detained his husband. Eliazar Sanchez Ayala was stopped by the Indiana State Police on I-70 for an alleged speeding violation the other day, despite having a valid driver's license, work permit, social security number, and, only 2 resolved speeding tickets on his record. Federal immigration agents arrived and detained him, though neither state police nor ICE have explained why he was targeted or who initiated the feds' involvement. Sanchez Ayala was moved through multiple detention facilities in Indiana and Kentucky, spent days effectively disappeared from public systems, and still, at the time I wrote this, did not appear in ICE's online detainee locator, a system that normally updates within 48 hours. His husband, Isaac Reeves, spent days calling jails and detention centers just to locate him, while Sanchez Ayala remains jailed without access to even a public defender, forcing the family to fundraise privately for legal representation. This case illustrates how intensified immigration enforcement can ensnare long-term residents with legal work authorization, separating families without transparency, clear charges, or meaningful due process, even in states like Indiana, where, local police are theoretically cooperating with ICE and they could do things, by the book. But again, here come the feds, just big dicking locals and taking this guy God knows where. And, in the Indiana that the Washington Post envisions, right? Like, Is this still going on? Are we still doing these things? Or would they not even let these 2 men who, obviously love each other very much get married? I only see them winding the clock backwards. For example, here's another example of this. Down in southern Indiana, you recall, there was a bit of an AIDS crisis a couple years ago because of, used needles. So a July executive order from Trump cut off federal funding for key harm reduction supplies, forcing syringe exchange programs like that one to halt, or to destroy items like cookers and tourniquets, despite decades of evidence showing that these tools reduce disease and save lives. In Clark County, health officials are boxing up supplies that had been bought with federal money previously, marked do not use, and they're scrambling to keep these programs alive now with private money, as Indiana's syringe exchange law is set to expire next year. A dangerous echo of the HIV catastrophe that struck nearby Austin in Scott County. The data from these communities is consistent. Indiana exchanges have reversed nearly 25,000 overdoses statewide, cut HIV and hepatitis C transmission roughly in half, and returned over 90% of used syringes, while Scott County's HIV rates plummeted after exchanges were introduced and remained low until the program ended. So, these programs are saving lives, but Trump and Republicans are cutting them. What happened to the pro-life party? And, listen, they don't want you to put drugs in your body. They don't want you to poison yourself, but they will gladly poison you, or at least let their corporate donors do so. This week, the Department of Energy ordered 2 aging Indiana coal plants to stay online for at least 90 more days, blocking their planned retirement and citing rising electricity demand from AI data centers and concerns about grid reliability. This move fits a broader push by Trump to prop up coal using emergency powers under the Federal Power Act that critics say are meant for true crises, not to override long-term energy transition plans approved by utilities, regulators, and grid operators. Environmental and consumer advocates are warning the orders are legally dubious and costly, arguing there is no real grid emergency, although, taking all that wind power offline or keeping it from going online certainly doesn't help. They point to similar federal interventions elsewhere that have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per day to keep these uneconomic coal plants running. Uneconomic for us, certainly economically beneficial, again, for the Trump donors, the fossil fuel oligarchs. Um, Continuing to look at the benefits, as it were, of Trumpism here in Indiana. State lawmakers are weighing whether to conform to Trump's new federal tax cuts, a move that Governor Braun's administration estimates could cost the state more than $900 million over 2 years if adopted in full. You know, nice thing of Trump to propose these tax cuts and then, put it on the states to actually implement them. The federal changes include tax breaks for tips, overtime pay, vehicle loan interest, and major business deductions, delivering hundreds of millions in taxpayer savings. Usually the highest taxpayers, the wealthiest taxpayers, benefit from these savings, but also shrinking Indiana's tax base, even as the state projects ballooning cash reserves by 2027. Stick a pin in that. We're going to come back to that momentarily. Democrats and tax policy analysts warn these cuts skew toward wealthier earners and threaten core priorities, arguing Indiana should instead protect Medicaid funding, expand child care assistance, and reduce regressive sales taxes rather than rush to mirror these Trump tax policies. But hey, like, life sucks. They're rounding up our neighbors. They're poisoning our air and our water. They're getting rid of harm reduction programs. But hey, at least the state budget is going to run a surplus. The Indiana revenue picture has flipped dramatically from earlier this year, with updated forecasts now projecting tax collections strong enough to push state cash reserves to nearly $5 billion by mid-2027. This is more than double earlier estimates and well above the 10 to 15% cushion lawmakers usually target. Republican leaders, of course, are downplaying this windfall and resisting new spending, with Governor Braun framing the surplus as proof that his tax cuts are working and signaling caution despite the much rosier outlook. Democrats argue, meanwhile, that the surplus should reverse earlier budget cuts, saying lawmakers were spooked by a bleak spring forecast and now have an obligation to reinvest in programs serving children and seniors and people with disabilities and other vulnerable Hoosiers. And we will look a little more in depth at certain vulnerable Hoosiers who are particularly harmed by that here momentarily. Now, Tabitha, if we have this $5 billion surplus, apparently, by 2027, that tells me that we're not spending enough on public services. I mean, am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I straddle a lot of interesting communities, and this is where I think that I can be really objective in some areas. I do think that Hoosiers at the core really want to help their neighbors, and we just have to pick the things that are most valuable to us, like collectively. And I would say, protecting water rights, protecting clean water, that should be at the top, because that affects the farmers, the hunters, the fishermen, like everybody. If we don't have clean water, then we can't do good things. We can't be healthy people, right? So clean water, clean air. Nobody's saying that, somebody has this magic solution to make all of this stuff happen, like boom, right now. But we have to decide what our objectives are and then decide how we're going to divvy up that money. And it cannot be moving forward corporately motivated, right? Like, we can't say, right here, we want to attract all these businesses to come into Indiana, flatten all this farm ground, poison the water or whatever for the residents for the next 50, 60, 100 years, and then claim that we are Hoosier based, family based, religiously based, or whatever. I don't know. I just think we have to demand from these politicians that their policies are very clear and demand how they serve their community. And from there, right, then we can have a really clear picture of what that budget looks like. Because I think, most Hoosiers, there's a lot of poor people here, but they can all balance a checkbook. They're not stupid, like, they've seen all their grocery prices go through the roof. They've seen their energy prices go through the roof. They're pissed off, and rightfully so. And then you have these people on a hill, Washington, D.C. or Indianapolis, pick one, talking down to them, demanding loyalty and fealty when they're like, right, we gave you a chance. And, if we were in a business relationship, we'd fire you or we'd leave because you're not serving us,
Yeah. Jesse, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Like a budget surplus beyond what you would need for an absolute rainy day situation means you're doing something wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think even Republicans would agree that a budget surplus is a bad thing because the state shouldn't be taking more of your hard-earned money than it absolutely needs to keep the lights on. The issue, of course, is who is paying taxes, who's not, who's benefiting from the government services, and who's not, right? And so we're increasingly taxing the poor to give services to the rich, and that is happening at every level, from the smallest to the greatest. And I wanted to quickly, my buddy Will is watching, and he would be really mad if I didn't take the opportunity to talk about data centers, right? He and I have been both fighting. He's been to a lot of the Decatur Township meetings here in Indianapolis and in Martindale-Brightwood. There's like all over in Indianapolis, as well as in most of the rural state, people are up in arms and they hate data centers. Tabitha mentioned earlier, yes, they also hate wind and solar farms that are plants that are taking over farmland. But data centers in particular, unlike those others, tend to raise their rates, right? Raise your electric rates, cause you more harm. And so I just wanted to point out, this is Donald Trump taking the side of the data centers and saying their existence, which didn't, it's brand new. 5 years ago, no one was talking about this brand new industry that is owned and operated by the same tech giants that we all justifiably hate, has the right to poison your kids, and you're not allowed to say anything about it. Because if you look up, especially asthma rates and cancer rates near coal-fired plants, cleanest coal in the world, you're still seeing a asthma rate, last I checked, in southern Indiana near coal plants was 7 times the rate up in Marion County. And it's not like we don't have industry in Marion County, right? It's specifically the coal. So again, we're poisoning your children so that people can also raise your electric rates. And that is the government forcing that to happen. This isn't like free market. This isn't just what people want. The consent of the government is totally gone here. We're just absolutely, the government is hand in hand with the tech oligarchs that are just trying to addict us all to social media and their Gemini AI bullshit. We can argue about that later. But it's not in any of our best interests. It's only in Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg. There's like 5 tech oligarchs who are controlling all of this. We have to fight back, and all of us on all sides of the political spectrum should agree on that issue at least.
Yeah, and well, along those lines, Chuck, I remember when the tech industry used to be sort of vaguely left-coded, and Obama came up in 2008, sort of cozy with tech, or at least it seemed that way, because he was basically the first candidate to know how to use social media. And there was a sort of symbiotic relationship as the tech industry grew during his administration. But yet now you see who these folks really are. Like Jesse said, capitalism always finds the lowest place to go. And in bed with the fossil fuel industry is where they are, because they need energy now. They need to fuel their data centers now. They want to build generative AI. They want to build Skynet now. What happened to our beneficent tech overlords who would guide us to the clean economy of the future?
Fair question. Because I remember when President Obama in his run-up was talking about, there was this ongoing debate of green jobs that were going to come in under his plans and those kind of things. And for a lot of it kind of did. But I think what happened was there was this revolt because the oligarchs that were in power at that time kind of saw their grip fading. They saw that, hey, I can't control this as well as I used to. So they started working behind the scenes. And it sorry, my brain's going on 3 different tangents, so I got to try and select one and stay on it. Because there was just so many points I want to touch on. But
AI ruined your brain, Chuck. Blame them.
Probably more than I realize, I'm sure. But I guess I'll look at it from a water resource standpoint, because that's my bread and butter. That's where I've lived for the last 20 years. That Jesse's right that these data centers are absolutely unnecessary, and they are one of the prime drivers of environmental damage right now. You know, the need for the water supply is just crazy in the certain light of that we're making investments for that LEAP district right now. They're just insane. You know, you're talking 10 million gallons a day, which is more than the city of Greenfield uses almost in a year. Okay. I mean, it's freaking crazy. So when you talk about resource management and the idea that tech can be a partner, and it can, if you do it the right way with the right investment strategies. Solar panels in farm fields, absolutely wrong direction. Could we put solar panels over the top of every parking structure in downtown Indianapolis? Hell yes. And guess what? Wow, we would have a power abundance to no end. To that same point, with the state having that abundance of funds, this is the same that's being done in certain local municipalities, that they squirrel away money, sometimes unbeknownst to the general public, and then what do they do with it? It just either sits there collecting dust, or it gets spent on things that are rather questionable. So the question that we really have to ask ourselves is, what are our priorities? Do we want to have a society that can have our resources, have clean drinking water, have clean waterways and streams, that, you know, cleaning up the White River? That was a big focus for a long time. And now the White River is more healthy than it has been in years past, because that investment was made to make those things happen. We can do that everywhere else if we get past the ideological constraints. We get past some of this stupidity that has pervaded us. You know, clean water is not a right, left, anything else. I mean, that is a human need, just like housing. You know, having sanitary living conditions. That's why we have wastewater treatment. That's why we have drinking water systems, to provide a healthy environment for our communities. But now we need to focus on clean soil, clean air, looking at emission standards, which the Trump regime is trying to get rid of. You know, the EPA, the current EPA is just a fragment of its what was its intention. I mean, the Clean Air Act, I mean, is being literally torn apart left, right, and sideways because of these data centers, because they use diesel generators that create all the pollutants in the air. And Jesse's right. The impact on human health of these things is we don't see it right now, but we will see it dramatically in 5 or 10 years, when these things go belly up and they're just going to be these husks of buildings just sitting there collecting dust, because they're only going to be viable for 10 years, maybe. I'm being maybe a little generous. So we have to center our priorities. And I agree with Tabitha wholeheartedly. If we choose as a society to survive and thrive, then we start making the right decisions. Right now, that's not happening.
No, it's not. And this here, what we're talking about, you know, we're sicker, we're more polluted, we're more addicted, our neighbors are getting rounded up. These are the gifts of Trumpism that old Ku Klux Kringle has bestowed upon Indiana for the holiday season. Do you feel free yet?